Hello and welcome to today's lesson where we're looking at contingency planning in business. So contingency planning is all about what happens if. So for example, what happens if sales suddenly slump by 50% overnight? What happens if a key team member leaves for a new position? Or what happens if your entire customer support team who share the same room all fall ill at the same time? Now these questions are risks to the operation of an organization. And if the organization doesn't handle these risks well or these situations well, then there might be an adverse impact on the operations of the business and even the future profits of the business. Now, although contingency plans typically specify how to deal with the materialization of negative risks, good contingency plans should also identify how to handle positive unexpected disruptions. So for example, if media exposure suddenly led to product orders increasing by 300% overnight, then how would this surge in demand be handled by the business? So in a nutshell, contingency planning arises from the fact that exposure to risk, both positive and negative, is unavoidable in business. So developing a contingency plan or contingency plans is part of a broader process around managing business risk. And it comprises of the following three components. So first is risk management, where you identify and manage risks, both positive and negative, which threaten the overall organization. Second, you have contingency planning, which is the topic of this video. And thirdly, you have crisis management planning, which is around developing plans to handle sudden crisis situations. Now, these three steps combined will form the business continuity plan, and you can think of contingency planning as being around proactively planning for disruption, whereas crisis management planning is a more reactive strategy. Now, it's worth noting that contingency planning should happen at all levels within an organization and not just at the senior management level. And that's because we don't just need to make plans for major risks, things like natural disasters, but also for lesser disruptions, such as a key person being ill for a month, or even a machine breaking down. So how do you create a contingency plan? Well, there's three steps to the process. The first is to assess all the risks. The second step is to create the contingency plan. And the third is, and this is an important one, to maintain the contingency plan after you have created it. So let's look at each of these in a bit more detail. So the first step in creating a contingency plan is to assess the risks. And the first step is to identify critical functions. So to find the important risks, we first need to understand the critical functions within the organization. And you can help yourself identify these functions by asking what-if questions. So for example, what happens if a certain supplier went bankrupt? What if we lost all customer data? What if the entire sales team was ill for a week? Now, once you have identified critical functions, the next step is to find the risks being faced in each of these critical functions. And you can use brainstorming to help you here. And finally, the third step is to prioritize the risks. Now, one of the traps of contingency planning is that you over-plan, and that means that you try to plan for every eventuality. Now, that's obviously wasteful, as it's extremely unlikely most events will occur. So what we want to do is create contingency plans for those events which will either impact the organization in a major way, or those events that are actually quite likely to occur. And we can do this by ranking our risks in terms of the probability that they will occur and also the impact they'll have on the organization should they occur. So as you can see in the diagram here, we have two high priority risks in that kind of red-orange area. And those are the risks we'll address first in our contingency planning. So risks 1 and 3. Now, one risk is of a medium priority, which is 2. And you can see we've got two low priority risks, 4 and 5, and we maybe won't even address those at all in our contingency planning. So once you've identified the risks, the next step is to create your contingency plan. So far we have our prioritized list of risks, and now we're going to create our plans detailing how we're going to react if any of these things actually do go wrong. Now, the most sensible way to start this work is to tackle the highest priority risks first. And actually, there's no right or wrong way to create a contingency plan, but the plan should contain step-by-step instructions detailing what needs to happen and when to get the business back to normal operations. Now, having just said that there's no right or wrong way to create a contingency plan, you may find the following really useful to include. So firstly, determine the precondition. So what event has to happen for the contingency plan to be activated. Next, specify exactly who is in charge at each stage of the contingency plan. You'll want to identify the needs of all stakeholders up front and involve them in creating the contingency plan. And then for each action, you should really try and be as specific as you can. So obviously you'll want to include who is responsible for that action, but you'll also want to include who they report to, how long the action will take, what communication will happen, and more broadly, you'll want to document all communications. So different contingency plans will require different communications. So for example, if your company website crashed, that may require internal communications to coordinate the resolution of the problem, and also email communications with customers to keep them abreast of progress. But if it was something different, maybe you had a product which was found to cause actual bodily harm to one of your customers, then that's something completely different. That's going to require not only internal communications, but also very carefully managed public relations. So once you've created your plan, you'll need to get it approved and included in any standard operating procedures or SOPs so that everyone understands when the plan should be triggered and what their part of the plan is. Now, finally, it can be really useful to test your plans. So that means, stimulate the triggering of a contingency plan to perform a dry run through the steps which are detailed in the plan. And that's going to help ensure that the plan is fit for purpose. So the final step, step 3, is to maintain all of your contingency plans. So just as with life, business doesn't exist in a vacuum. So the world around us is in constant change. And because of this, it's important not just to set and forget your contingency plans. They'll need to be updated regularly. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. The way a system works could have changed. A key team member could have left. Maybe the organization structure has changed. Maybe some new risks have emerged, or even some existing risks have gone away. And ultimately, there's kind of 2 ways in which you can approach keeping your contingency plans up to date. Now, the first is to create a schedule where you will update and then reapprove your contingency plans. Now, effectively, this is a regular cadence of meetings. Perhaps the team will meet once per month or once per quarter. And in this meeting, you will discuss and update all of your contingency plans. The second approach is to embed the process of updating your contingency plans in all the other processes of the organization. And that means that if someone were to change a system, then they need to update the contingency plan as part of that change to that system. It would also mean that if someone wanted to bring a new product to market, that they'd also need to update the relevant contingency plans or create a new contingency plan for that new product. So finally, once your contingency plan is in place, you may wish to keep it off-site, perhaps by ensuring all key team members carry a copy on their mobile device. And that's to avoid the very undesirable situation where a disaster such as a fire destroys not only a key building, but also the contingency plan itself. So in summary, contingency planning is often low on the priority list for many organizations. And that's because day-to-day operations can consume everyone's attention. And so it's difficult to find the time for contingency planning. But just like introducing a new product line, contingency planning is an investment. So when considering investing in contingency planning, don't just think about the cost of the investment, but remember to consider the potential costs to the organization should you choose not to invest in contingency planning. So that's it for today's lesson. Really hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.